creation of the Chamber Militant remains one of the most pivotal events in the history of the Imperium, born out of necessity, chaos, and the desire for unity in a fractured universe. Yet, despite the weight it carries in the annals of the Imperium, the true origins and reasoning behind the Chamber's formation are shrouded in mystery, political maneuvering, and harsh realities. Its creation did not occur in a vacuum, nor was it the result of a single decision. It emerged as a response to growing threats, internal fractures, and an ongoing battle for power within the Imperium's structures. In this complex backdrop, the Chamber Militant found its purpose not just as a military force, but as a symbol of authority, power, and ideological resolve. The Imperium was, and remains, a vast, multifaceted entity struggling to maintain control over its many factions, each with its own goals, agendas, and traditions. While unity is often heralded as the pillar of the Imperium, its very nature means that division is an ever-present reality. The need for a force capable of acting decisively and with unquestionable loyalty was crucial. However, the Chamber's formation cannot be understood without considering the broader dynamics within the Imperium itself. For decades, certain factions had sought greater control over the military, while others wrestled with the limitations of existing structures. Political tensions ran high as many within the Imperium saw the growing threats to its stability and security and realized that bold steps would be needed. The creation of the Chamber Militant was one such step, yet its exact role, powers, and its relationship to the larger Imperium would be a topic of debate for centuries to come. As we delve deeper into the history and formation of the Chamber Militant, we will explore the key players involved, the underlying preconditions that led to its creation, and the monumental decisions that defined its trajectory. This will set the stage for understanding the full impact of this force on the Imperium, both in its early days and in the centuries that followed. The Chamber Militant was not just the product of political intrigue or a moment of desperation. It was a reflection of the Imperium's internal struggles and its ever-present drive for survival. It was designed to be more than just a tool of war. It was a symbol of the Imperium's ability to evolve in the face of unimaginable odds, and a testament to its complex and often contradictory nature. By the end of this exploration, we will have a clearer picture of why the Chamber Militant was created, how it shaped the Imperium, and the unforeseen consequences of its formation. The Chamber Militant's creation is intricately tied to several key factions, each playing a role in the broader political and military landscape of the Imperium. These factions operated in tandem, each with its own influence, motivations, and agendas, all of which led to the emergence of the Chamber as a force of extraordinary significance. Understanding their roles helps clarify the complexities of the time and the rationale for such a drastic and impactful formation. The Adeptus Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy, holds a pivotal position in the history of the Chamber Militant. As the imperial faith's strongest pillar, it was tasked with guiding the spiritual direction of the Imperium, wielding enormous power over its people through religion and doctrine. However, the ecclesiarchy's role went beyond that of spiritual leader. It was intrinsically involved in the internal struggles within the Imperium, often acting as an enforcer of religious purity and moral guidance. While the Ministorum's influence was far-reaching, it also had enemies, both within and outside the faith. The creation of the Chamber Militant allowed the ecclesiarchy to solidify its authority over the Imperium's military affairs, providing it with a direct arm to combat both heresy and external threats to imperial rule. In many ways, the Ministorum's intervention in the creation of the Chamber was driven by a desire to maintain and expand its influence, ensuring that no force, whether secular or religious, could undermine its power. The Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, also played a significant role in the formation of the Chamber. As the Imperium's primary military force, the Space Marines were seen as the ultimate protectors of humanity, often deployed to handle the most dangerous and extreme situations. While their involvement was indirect, Their influence over imperial affairs, both military and political, had far-reaching consequences. The Space Marines' loyalty to the Emperor and their unique genetic enhancements made them an essential part of the decision-making process regarding the formation of specialized forces like the Chamber Militant. However, their role in the development of this new force was far from uncomplicated. Their long-standing commitment to defending the Imperium was not always aligned with the new direction the Chamber represented, and tensions between the Adeptus Astartes and the Ecclesiarchy would grow as the Chamber took shape. This friction, based on differing priorities and methods of warfare, would continue to be a central theme in the Chamber's history. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, contributed to the creation of the Chamber Militant through their vast technological and logistical expertise. Their role was not simply as a passive observer. They were active participants in the formation of military forces that could operate at the cutting edge of the Imperium's capabilities. The Adeptus Mechanicus, with its access to advanced technologies, weapons, and military support, ensured that the Chamber Militant had the tools it needed to succeed in its mission. This collaboration between the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Ecclesiarchy signified an important shift in how the Imperium approached warfare. It marked the beginning of a more integrated approach, blending faith with technology to create a military force that was as much ideological as it was combat-focused. This partnership would have lasting effects on the relationship between the Mechanicus and the other factions within the Imperium, as their role in the creation of such an institution would spark debates about the balance of power between faith and machine. The Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum, was another critical faction whose role in the formation of the Chamber Militant cannot be understated. While the Guard's focus was on mass conscription and regular warfare, the creation of a specialized military force like the Chamber Militant represented a new approach to Imperial defense. The Guard's influence, however, was less about direct involvement in the creation of the Chamber, and more about the necessity for the Imperium to expand and diversify its military capabilities. The Astra Militarum's traditional approach was often not enough to combat the more unique threats facing the Imperium, prompting the need for specialized forces. The Guard's leaders recognized the importance of the Chamber Militant, though they did not directly control its creation. Instead, they understood its potential utility in dealing with crises that the standard Imperial Guard could not effectively handle. Within the political sphere, the High Lords of Terra, the ruling council of the Imperium, were perhaps the most influential group in deciding the necessity of such a force. Comprised of representatives from various factions, including the Ecclesiarchy, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and other significant political entities, the High Lords of Terra were the ultimate decision-makers in the Imperium's military and political matters. Their role in the creation of the Chamber Militant was shaped by their ability to see the bigger picture of the Imperium's survival and their willingness to take decisive action in moments of crisis. While individual members of the High Lords had their own agendas, the collective body recognized the need for a new military force that could address specific, often ideological threats to the Imperium's stability. Their approval and guidance were instrumental in the Chamber Militant's creation. In the background, there were also the rogue elements, those who operated outside the official channels of Imperial authority, but whose actions and beliefs contributed to the need for such a force. Heretical groups, traitors, and those whose loyalty to the Emperor was in question created an environment of suspicion and conflict that necessitated the establishment of a force like the Chamber Militant. These groups, whether working openly or in the shadows, acted as a constant reminder of the ever-present dangers to imperial rule, forcing the High Lords and the Ecclesiarchy to create a response that would be both formidable and unyielding. Lastly, there were the various intelligence agencies and organizations within the Imperium that were dedicated to maintaining the stability of the Imperium and rooting out corruption and heresy. While not as overt in their involvement as the other factions, their role in providing the information that would justify the need for such a military force was undeniable. These organizations, operating in the shadows, acted as both informers and enforcers, helping to push the creation of a force that could ensure the safety and purity of the Imperium. The Chamber Militant's formation was not the result of any single faction acting in isolation. Instead, it was the product of a complex web of relationships, each faction contributing in its own way to the emergence of this powerful military force. From the religious and ideological motivations of the ecclesiarchy to the technological prowess of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Chamber was a multifaceted creation that would reflect the many forces vying for influence within the Imperium. Its creation was, in many ways, a response to the political, military, and ideological pressures that had been building within the Imperium for generations. Each faction played a role in ensuring that the Chamber Militant would be not only a military force, but a symbol of the Imperium's unyielding drive to preserve its vision of humanity's future. The formation of the Chamber Militant was not an isolated decision made in a vacuum. It was the result of a series of escalating pressures within the Imperium, both from external and internal forces. These pressures had been building for centuries, a product of systemic weaknesses, political infighting, growing threats to imperial stability, and a shift in the Imperium's military needs. The root causes of its creation lie in a complex web of historical, ideological, and military developments that had been evolving for generations, each contributing to the final outcome. One of the most significant preconditions for the formation of the Chamber Militant was the increasing fragmentation within the Imperium itself. While the Imperium prided itself on its unity under the Emperor's rule, in practice, it had always been a delicate balance of power between countless factions, each with its own agendas, priorities, and methods. Over time, this balance began to break down, with some factions growing more powerful and others losing influence. The result was a constant tug-of-war for control, with each group seeking to solidify its place in the Imperium's hierarchy. The ecclesiarchy, for instance, had long been a major power, but its role was increasingly contested by other institutions, particularly the Adeptus Astartes and the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose interests were not always aligned with the goals of the ecclesiarchy. This fragmentation led to a need for consolidation of power within the Imperium, and the Chamber Militant was, in part, an answer to that need. As various factions vied for influence, they began to see the importance of a unified force that could not only combat external threats, but also maintain order within the Imperium's many disparate territories. The ecclesiarchy, for its part, recognized that its ability to control the Imperium's military was increasingly being challenged, especially as the Adeptus Astartes grew in power and prestige. The creation of a force like the Chamber Militant would give the ecclesiarchy a dedicated arm to enforce its will, not just on the battlefield, but across the Imperium itself. Beyond internal fragmentation, the growing external threats to the Imperium played a crucial role in pushing the need for the Chamber. The universe was a dangerous place, teeming with hostile forces, both Xenos and Traitor, all vying for dominance. The constant state of warfare had become a defining feature of the Imperium's existence. For centuries, the Imperium had relied on a mix of the Adeptus Astartes, Imperial Guard, and other military units to defend its borders and maintain its control. However, the sheer scale of the threats facing humanity had begun to outstrip the capabilities of these existing forces. The rise of powerful Xenos factions, the continued chaos and rebellion from within, and the ongoing threats from the forces of chaos demanded a response that went beyond traditional military approaches. The Imperium needed a specialized force, one that could act decisively and swiftly, both in combat and in political and religious matters. The creation of the Chamber Militant was a direct response to this need for a new kind of force, one that could handle the complex and often dangerous situations the Imperium was facing. It was clear that the existing military structures, while formidable, were not enough to deal with the unique and often existential threats posed by the universe. The Chamber was envisioned as a force that could operate independently, with the authority to deal with any challenge, whether it was a Xenos invasion, a traitor rebellion, or an internal heretical movement. This broad mandate made the Chamber Militant a unique entity, able to operate across the vast and diverse reaches of the Imperium. In addition to military and ideological fragmentation, another significant precondition for the creation of the Chamber was the increasing importance of faith within the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy had long been a central pillar of imperial society, but the growing religious zealotry within the Imperium created a climate in which the Church was not only a spiritual authority, but also a political one. As the Emperor's role was increasingly seen as divinely infallible, the influence of the ecclesiarchy over the imperial masses and the military grew. However, with this rise in religious power came a corresponding rise in opposition. The Imperium's growing reliance on religious ideology, especially the spread of the imperial cult, began to clash with the more pragmatic, secular concerns of other factions like the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Astra Militarum. Tensions between the religious and non-religious factions of the Imperium were escalating, and the need for a force that could reconcile these differences became more apparent. The rise of these ideological tensions highlighted another critical precondition: the increasing political instability within the Imperium. With multiple factions vying for power, the question of loyalty became central. The growing complexity of the Imperium's governance, with various organizations seeking to assert their dominance, created an environment in which absolute loyalty to the Emperor was more difficult to ensure. The Imperium was a vast empire, with millions of worlds and billions of people to control. Maintaining that control, both militarily and ideologically, required a force that could inspire loyalty and enforce order without question. The ecclesiarchy's desire to form the Chamber Militant was, in part, an attempt to secure this loyalty, ensuring that no force, internal or external, could challenge the Emperor's rule without facing the full might of the Church's military arm. At the same time, the Imperium was dealing with an increasingly hostile environment. The continued pressure from external enemies, particularly the forces of chaos, meant that there was no time to waste in responding to the Imperium's weaknesses. The threats from chaos were growing more pronounced, with forces that were capable of destabilizing entire sectors of the galaxy. The rise of chaos cults, the spread of heresy, and the threat of chaos space marines and demons meant that the Imperium's existing military forces were stretched thin, especially in regions where the Church's influence was weakest. The ecclesiarchy recognized that it needed a direct and potent military force, one that could serve its interests in dealing with these ever-present threats. The Chamber Militant was born out of this necessity, a dedicated military arm of the ecclesiarchy that could combat both external and internal threats without hesitation or compromise. The political and military climate of the time was further compounded by the logistical challenges the Imperium faced in maintaining its vast, decentralized territories. Communication and coordination were becoming increasingly difficult as the Imperium expanded, and the need for a specialized force that could be rapidly deployed across vast distances became more apparent. The Chamber Militant, with its ability to operate autonomously and with speed, provided a solution to these challenges. Its creation allowed the Imperium to respond to crises more effectively, ensuring that no matter where the threat arose, the ecclesiarchy would have the means to deal with it swiftly and decisively. Thus, the creation of the Chamber Militant was the culmination of a series of escalating pressures within the Imperium: political, ideological, military, and logistical. The failure of existing structures to meet the demands of an increasingly complex and dangerous galaxy led to the birth of a new force, one that would play a pivotal role in the Imperium's future. Its creation was not simply a reaction to immediate threats, but a reflection of the Imperium's ongoing struggle to adapt to a universe that was becoming ever more hostile and chaotic. The development of the Chamber Militant followed a complex and strategic timeline, with each phase marked by political maneuvering, military preparations, and ideological shifts. These events were not isolated, but rather part of an ongoing process that evolved as the needs of the Imperium and the ecclesiarchy became more urgent. The process unfolded over several key stages, each one shaping the Chamber's ultimate form and role in the Imperium. The first stage of development began with the initial discussions among the High Lords of Terra and the Ecclesiarchy. In response to the growing internal and external threats to the Imperium, the Ecclesiarchy pushed for the formation of a dedicated military force that would answer directly to the Emperor's divine authority. The discussions were initially met with resistance from other factions, particularly the Adeptus Astartes and the Adeptus Mechanicus, who viewed such a force as an encroachment on their territories and influence. These early debates were critical as they laid the groundwork for the nature and purpose of the Chamber Militant. They also revealed the political fractures within the Imperium, with some factions more concerned about their own power than the stability of the Imperium itself. In parallel, the Adeptus Mechanicus began to prepare the technological and logistical support necessary for such a force to operate effectively. The Mechanicus' involvement was crucial, as the Ecclesiarchy alone lacked the resources and technical expertise to create and sustain a military force capable of responding to the wide range of threats facing the Imperium. The Mechanicus provided the technological backbone that would support the Chamber Militant's operations, from advanced weaponry to specialized vehicles and equipment. This collaboration between the Ecclesiarchy and the Mechanicus marked a turning point in the way the Imperium would approach military innovation, blending the power of faith with cutting-edge technology. The second stage saw the formal establishment of the Chamber Militant, with the Ecclesiarchy taking the lead in recruiting and training the force. This phase involved the selection of individuals loyal to the Imperial Creed, those who would serve as the backbone of the Chamber Militant. The initial recruits were primarily drawn from the ranks of the Adeptus Ministorum itself, with a focus on those who held the Emperor's will as their guiding principle. The early recruits were indoctrinated into a strict code of conduct, designed to mold them into unwavering instruments of the Emperor's will. These warriors were not just soldiers, but agents of the Ecclesiarchy, carrying the weight of their faith and their mission into every battle. During this period, the first campaigns of the Chamber Militant began to take shape. These early missions were often covert, dealing with internal threats such as heretical movements, cults, and those within the Imperium who were seen as a threat to the Ecclesiarchy's control. These early campaigns helped to solidify the Chamber's purpose, showcasing its ability to act as a tool of both military and ideological enforcement. The use of the Chamber Militant in these operations began to raise questions about the role of such a force within the broader Imperium. Was it a tool for religious purification or a more general-purpose military unit? The Chamber's growing involvement in military operations, especially those that bordered on the religious, set the stage for later controversies. The third stage of development involved the integration of the Chamber Militant into the broader Imperium's military structure. As the force gained momentum and proved its effectiveness, the question of its place within the existing hierarchy of the Imperium became increasingly important. The Ecclesiarchy had made it clear that the Chamber Militant would answer directly to the High Lords of Terra, bypassing many of the traditional military structures of the Imperium. This independence, while ensuring loyalty to the Emperor and the Ecclesiarchy, also created tension with the Adeptus Astartes and other military factions, who saw it as an attempt to centralize power and undermine their own autonomy. This phase was also marked by a number of significant battles and operations that demonstrated the growing power and influence of the Chamber Militant. It was during this period that the Chamber began to establish itself as a significant force, capable of taking on not only internal threats, but also external ones. The use of the Chamber in large-scale campaigns against Xenos and traitor factions further solidified its place in the Imperium's military apparatus. As the Chamber's reputation grew, so too did its influence, leading to more direct involvement in the political and military decisions of the Imperium. The fourth stage was one of consolidation, as the Chamber Militant sought to solidify its position within the Imperium and ensure that its influence would not be easily challenged. This period saw a shift in the way the Chamber was perceived, both within the ecclesiarchy and the wider Imperium. No longer just a tool of religious enforcement, the Chamber began to take on a more complex role as a military organization. Its missions became more varied, ranging from the suppression of heresy to the defense of Imperial worlds from external threats. The Chamber also began to adopt more advanced tactics and strategies, drawing on the experiences of previous campaigns to refine its methods. This period of consolidation was not without its challenges, as political factions within the Imperium continued to resist the growing power of the ecclesiarchy and its military arm. One of the most significant aspects of this phase was the increased cooperation between the Chamber Militant and the Adeptus Mechanicus. As the Chamber's technological needs continued to grow, the Mechanicus became an even more integral part of its operations. The relationship between the two factions, once marked by suspicion and rivalry, evolved into one of mutual dependence. The Mechanicus provided the technological innovations needed for the Chamber to maintain its edge, while the ecclesiarchy offered the ideological and religious justification for the Mechanicus's involvement in the creation of the Chamber. The fifth and final stage of the Chamber's development saw it emerge as one of the most powerful and influential forces within the Imperium. By this point, the Chamber Militant had not only achieved military success, but had also become a key player in the Imperium's political landscape. Its ability to maintain order, suppress heresy, and defend the Imperium from external threats made it indispensable to the ecclesiarchy's control over the Imperium. However, the growing power of the Chamber Militant also meant that it became a focal point for dissent and opposition. Other factions, particularly the Adeptus Astartes, viewed the Chamber's influence with growing concern, and tensions between these factions continued to simmer. This final stage also saw the formalization of the Chamber Militant's structure and mission. Its purpose, once somewhat ambiguous, became clearer as it took on a more defined role in the Imperium's defense and governance. The Chamber became a symbol of the ecclesiarchy's power and the Emperor's divine will, its military campaigns often serving as both a show of force and a demonstration of the Imperium's commitment to the Emperor's glory. As the Chamber Militant entered its maturity, it became clear that its influence would only continue to grow, cementing its place as one of the most formidable and controversial forces within the Imperium. The development of the Chamber Militant was not a linear or simple process. It was marked by internal conflicts, ideological shifts, and political maneuvering. However, through these stages of development, the Chamber Militant transformed from a nascent idea into a powerful force capable of shaping the future of the Imperium. Its creation and evolution were not only a response to external threats, but also a reflection of the Imperium's ongoing struggle to maintain unity, control, and power in a universe filled with danger and chaos. The key event that ultimately shaped the formation of the Chamber Militant occurred when the ecclesiarchy made the decisive move to establish a fully independent military force under its direct control. This moment was the result of years of political maneuvering, military necessity, and ideological ambition. The decision to create such a force did not come easily, nor was it a spontaneous one. It marked a definitive break with existing power structures within the Imperium, challenging the balance of influence between the Adeptus Astartes, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the broader Imperial military forces. Up until that point, the ecclesiarchy had always been a religious body, wielding considerable influence through its spiritual authority, but lacking the military force to back it up in a time of increasing political instability. The need for a military arm became undeniable as the Imperium faced a series of internal and external threats that could not be handled by traditional Imperial forces alone. Heretical cults, traitor uprisings, and the growing influence of Xenos all created a situation where the ecclesiarchy realized that it could no longer rely solely on the Imperial Guard or the Adeptus Astartes for protection. The Imperial military had become increasingly fragmented, and while the Adeptus Astartes remained the most formidable force within the Imperium, their loyalty and operations were increasingly aligned with other factions, sometimes leaving gaps in the ecclesiarchy's ability to maintain order. The decision to move forward with the creation of the Chamber Militant was the point at which the ecclesiarchy chose to seize control of its own destiny. It was a bold move that directly challenged the existing military hierarchy. No longer would the ecclesiarchy merely act as a religious authority. It would become a political and military power in its own right, one capable of influencing the fate of entire worlds. This was not just a reaction to immediate threats, but a strategic decision designed to ensure the survival of the ecclesiarchy's vision for the Imperium. The key decision was to allow the ecclesiarchy to create an independent force that could operate autonomously and be loyal exclusively to the Emperor's divine will. This was a break from the tradition of the imperial military structure, which operated under the oversight of various high lords and military leaders who could influence decisions and control the allocation of resources. The Chamber Militant was to be a self-contained military force under the command of the ecclesiarchy that could act swiftly and decisively without needing the approval or input of other factions. This represented a profound shift in the balance of power within the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy, long a religious organization, was now an empowered political and military force capable of wielding its own authority in the galaxy. One of the most significant elements of this decision was the new independence granted to the ecclesiarchy's military arm. The Chamber Militant would no longer be a subsidiary of the Imperial Guard, nor would it rely on the leadership of the Adeptus Astartes for protection. Instead, it would have the resources and autonomy to act on its own terms. This independence was critical for the ecclesiarchy's long-term strategy, as it allowed them to operate without interference from other factions whose priorities might differ from the Church's own goals. The implications of this decision were far-reaching. It allowed the ecclesiarchy to build a force that was not only ideologically aligned with its goals, but also capable of independent action, whether on the battlefield or in political arenas. The creation of the Chamber Militant meant that the ecclesiarchy could enforce its will in any region of the Imperium without needing to rely on the cooperation of other factions. It would be an enforcer of the Emperor's will in a way that no other force had been before. For the ecclesiarchy, this decision meant that its position within the Imperium was no longer just that of a religious overseer, but one of military and political authority as well. Equally important was the nature of the Chamber's mission. The decision to allow the ecclesiarchy to control such a force was not just about military strength, but also about reinforcing the ideological purity of the Imperium. The Chamber Militant was to be a symbol of unwavering loyalty to the Emperor, capable of rooting out heresy and maintaining the faith among the people of the Imperium. This ideological mandate was essential, as it allowed the ecclesiarchy to shape the character and mission of the Chamber Militant in ways that went beyond traditional military goals. The force was not merely a tool of warfare. It was an instrument of religious purity and political control. This integration of faith and military power was a radical idea, one that set the Chamber apart from the other forces of the Imperium and underscored the ecclesiarchy's desire to influence every aspect of imperial life. In essence, the key decision was the ecclesiarchy's assertion of its right to form a powerful, independent military force that would operate on its behalf and act in line with its vision of the Emperor's will. This shift had far-reaching consequences for the power structure of the Imperium. While the Adeptus Astartes, Adeptus Mechanicus, and other military entities had previously held a monopoly on force projection, the ecclesiarchy's decision to form its own military arm represented a clear challenge to that monopoly. It was not a decision made lightly, nor was it without opposition, but it was one that would ultimately reshape the nature of warfare within the Imperium. The decision to create the Chamber Militant also marked the moment when the ecclesiarchy fully embraced its role as a political and military actor within the Imperium, no longer merely a religious institution. By giving the Chamber the power to act as both a military and ideological enforcer, the ecclesiarchy signaled its intention to shape the future of the Imperium according to its vision, one in which faith and loyalty to the Emperor would be the guiding forces. This key event allowed the ecclesiarchy to build a legacy of power that would endure, influencing the fate of the Imperium for millennia to come. In conclusion, the creation of the Chamber Militant was driven by the ecclesiarchy's strategic decision to establish a dedicated, independent military force under its command, one that would serve the Emperor's will and maintain the purity of the Imperium. This decision was a key turning point in the history of the Imperium, as it challenged the existing power structures, consolidated the ecclesiarchy's control, and laid the groundwork for the Chamber Militant to become an essential force within the galaxy. The consequences of this decision would echo through the centuries, shaping the future of the Imperium in ways that would resonate for generations. The creation of the Chamber Militant had profound and immediate consequences on the Imperium, fundamentally altering the balance of power and the way military operations were conducted across the galaxy. The establishment of such a powerful, independent military arm under the ecclesiarchy brought about shifts in multiple areas, politically, militarily, and ideologically, each of which left an indelible mark on the future of the Imperium. One of the immediate impacts was the consolidation of power within the ecclesiarchy. By creating the Chamber Militant, the ecclesiarchy was no longer just a religious institution, but a political and military powerhouse. This shift meant that the ecclesiarchy could directly influence military decisions and even take action without the need for collaboration with other imperial entities. The Chamber's independence allowed the ecclesiarchy to enforce its interpretation of the Emperor's will across the galaxy without needing the approval or cooperation of the Adeptus Astartes or the Imperial Guard. For centuries, the ecclesiarchy had operated within the confines of the broader imperial structure, often at odds with other factions. The Chamber Militant's formation allowed the ecclesiarchy to break free from those constraints, giving it the autonomy to act decisively in matters of war, faith, and politics. The military implications were equally significant. The Chamber Militant, as a dedicated force under the ecclesiarchy's control, was able to take swift and unchallenged action against any threats, whether they came from within or outside the Imperium. This was a force specifically trained and equipped to deal with enemies of the faith, heretics, and the enemies of the Emperor, those who could no longer be left to the general military forces. The creation of such a force meant that the Imperium could now respond more quickly and decisively to internal rebellions, cult uprisings, or even Xenos invasions. The Chamber's primary loyalty to the ecclesiarchy ensured that religious purity was as much a part of the military's objectives as the protection of the Imperium itself. The expansion of the ecclesiarchy's reach through the creation of the Chamber Militant brought with it a new era of both religious and military control that would define the galaxy for generations to come. This increased military independence also had repercussions within the broader imperial structure. The creation of the Chamber Militant contributed to further fractures between the factions of the Imperium, particularly between the ecclesiarchy and the Adeptus Astartes. The Space Marines, while not directly threatened by the creation of the Chamber, found their military supremacy challenged by a new force that operated with a different agenda. The relationship between the Adeptus Astartes and the ecclesiarchy had always been complex, with the former seeing itself as the true protectors of the Imperium, while the latter sought to exert spiritual and military control over all aspects of imperial life. The emergence of the Chamber Militant as a tool to enforce the will of the ecclesiarchy was seen by many within the Adeptus Astartes as an attempt to centralize power in the hands of the Church, and it strained relations between these two powerful factions. While they often fought side by side, the ideological differences and the Chamber's growing prominence led to an increasing tension between them, as the Space Marines viewed the ecclesiarchy's military force as a competing entity in their quest for dominance. Another direct impact was on the implementation of imperial law and the suppression of heresy. The ecclesiarchy, through the Chamber Militant, was now able to enforce its vision of the Emperor's will in ways that were previously impossible. The Chamber's role as both a military and ideological enforcer meant that it was not simply tasked with defending the Imperium from external threats. It was also responsible for rooting out corruption, heresy, and those who were seen as straying from the righteous path. The creation of the Chamber Militant solidified the ecclesiarchy's control over the enforcement of imperial doctrine, granting it the authority to suppress religious dissent, conduct purges, and eliminate heretical movements with military precision. The ideological purity of the Imperium, which had always been a central tenet of the ecclesiarchy's mission, was now backed by the full might of the Chamber Militant. This enabled the Church to carry out crusades against perceived enemies of the Emperor, using its military arm to cleanse entire sectors of heresy and establish a rigid, unyielding orthodoxy. The presence of such a powerful and independent force within the Imperium also had consequences for its governance. The Chamber Militant's role as an enforcer of religious purity meant that political decisions were often filtered through a religious lens, with the ecclesiarchy exerting more control over the broader political landscape. The Chamber's military might allow the ecclesiarchy to directly influence the High Lords of Terra, ensuring that their will was reflected in imperial policy. This shift in the political dynamic created an environment where the ecclesiastical power of the Imperium was reinforced by its military power, giving the ecclesiarchy unprecedented control over both the spiritual and temporal aspects of imperial rule. The political structure of the Imperium became even more intertwined with religious doctrine, as the ecclesiarchy could now exercise direct military influence to ensure that imperial law was enforced according to its interpretation of the emperor's will. Externally, the creation of the Chamber Militant also signaled a shift in the Imperium's approach to its enemies. Prior to its formation, the Imperium had relied on a variety of military forces to protect its borders and defend its interests, but the Chamber Militant brought with it a new type of response. While the Imperial Guard and the Adeptus Astartes were highly trained and capable, they often lacked the ideological component necessary for tackling internal threats. The Chamber Militant, on the other hand, was not just a military force. It was a symbol of the Emperor's divine wrath, a force that was specifically trained to target not just enemies of the Imperium, but those who defiled the Emperor's name through heresy. This marked a turning point in how the Imperium viewed its enemies, particularly those within its own ranks. With the Chamber Militant's creation, the Imperium gained a powerful tool to combat not just external threats, but internal ideological threats as well. The internal stability of the Imperium was also significantly impacted. The creation of such a powerful and ideological military force allowed the Imperium to quell dissent more effectively, bringing greater unity to an empire that was at times threatened by division. While the formation of the Chamber Militant helped to solidify the ecclesiarchy's power, it also contributed to a greater centralization of authority, as the Church's influence permeated deeper into imperial society. The military and religious functions became more integrated, ensuring that the Imperium remained a unified, unyielding force against any who would seek to challenge its authority. The creation of the Chamber Militant also heralded the beginning of a more militarized society within the Imperium. With the ecclesiarchy's direct control over military forces, the people of the Imperium were subjected to a more direct and pervasive form of religious enforcement. The Chamber Militant's campaigns, whether against internal heretics or external Xenos threats, were often accompanied by ideological messages, and the faith of the Emperor was reinforced through military conquest. The power of the ecclesiarchy and the Chamber Militant helped to bring about a society where religious adherence was no longer simply a matter of personal belief, but a societal mandate enforced by the full force of the military. Ultimately, the creation of the Chamber Militant brought about a paradigm shift within the Imperium. It ensured the ecclesiarchy's dominance in both the spiritual and military spheres, altered the political landscape of the Imperium, and significantly influenced how the Imperium dealt with both internal and external threats. By establishing a military arm that was ideologically aligned with its goals, the ecclesiarchy was able to consolidate its power and strengthen its influence over the entire Imperium, setting the stage for future conflicts and the continued evolution of imperial rule. The creation of the Chamber Militant stands as a unique development in the history of the Imperium, blending faith with military power in a way that few other forces can claim. This union between the ecclesiarchy and a dedicated military force introduces several aspects that are often discussed in fan communities and that set the Chamber Militant apart from other factions in the Warhammer 40K universe. One of the most intriguing and frequently discussed aspects is the blending of religious zealotry with military discipline. While other military forces of the Imperium, such as the Adeptus Astartes, are driven by a sense of duty to the Emperor, the Chamber Militant's motivations are deeply intertwined with religious fervor. This makes the Chamber not just a fighting force, but a crusading arm of the ecclesiarchy. It is often debated how this ideology impacts the Chamber's operational strategy and battlefield conduct. The force is not simply an army, it is a manifestation of the Emperor's divine will, and every mission, whether it involves rooting out heretics or defending the Imperium from Xenos invaders, carries with it a deeply spiritual purpose. The ideological purity of the Chamber Militant has led to debates among fans regarding how much it defines their methods. Unlike the Adeptus Astartes, whose training and tactics are often focused on efficiency and strategic advantage, the Chamber Militant is driven by a relentless commitment to the Emperor's faith. This religious devotion is reflected in their approach to war. The Chamber Militant sees the battlefield not only as a place of combat, but as a holy ground where the Emperor's will is carried out through victory and the eradication of impurity. This relentless purity often leads to aggressive tactics and harsh decisions, with some fan discussions speculating that the Chamber might be more willing to commit atrocities or make morally questionable decisions if it serves their holy cause. This element of fanaticism distinguishes them from other military groups within the Imperium and has inspired countless debates among fans about their true role and purpose. Another unique aspect that often arises in fan discussions is the relationship between the Chamber Militant and the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Adeptus Mechanicus has always been essential to the Imperium's military efforts, but its relationship with the ecclesiarchy was once strained, as the religious focus of the ecclesiarchy contrasted sharply with the mechanized logical worldview of the Mechanicus. However, with the creation of the Chamber Militant, the ecclesiarchy's relationship with the Mechanicus became far more collaborative. The Mechanicus provided not only the necessary weaponry and technological advancements, but also a more advanced mechanized approach to warfare, ensuring that the Chamber Militant could operate at the cutting edge of military capabilities. This has led to discussions about how these two factions with fundamentally different worldviews could work together. Some fans speculate that the Chamber Militant's reliance on the Mechanicus for technological support may have created a unique tension between faith and machine, particularly with the Mechanicus's focus on the veneration of the Omnissiah, which is sometimes seen as conflicting with the Emperor's status as the singular divine figure. This dichotomy adds a layer of complexity to the Chamber Militant's operations, as they not only fight with military might, but also navigate the delicate balance between religious devotion and technological reliance. The Chamber Militant's independence from the Adeptus Astartes and Imperial Guard is another key point of interest among fans. While the Adeptus Astartes are the Imperium's foremost warriors, known for their martial prowess and genetically enhanced capabilities, the Chamber Militant is often seen as their ideological counterpart. This creates interesting discussions about the relationship between the two factions. While the Adeptus Astartes often view themselves as the ultimate defenders of the Emperor, the Chamber Militant sees itself as the truest expression of the Emperor's will, aligning military action with spiritual purity. Fans often discuss how this ideological divide impacts their interactions, both on the battlefield and in the broader context of imperial politics. The Chamber Militant's independence means that it does not need to defer to the strategic priorities of the Adeptus Astartes or other military factions, but instead acts according to the direct mandate of the ecclesiarchy. This, in turn, gives the Chamber Militant an aura of autonomy and power that the Adeptus Astartes might not possess, despite their combat superiority. A particularly intriguing point of discussion is the Chamber Militant's role in the internal politics of the Imperium. Fans often talk about how the ecclesiarchy's rise to military prominence through the Chamber Militant altered the political landscape of the Imperium. Prior to the formation of the Chamber, the ecclesiarchy had a strong, though sometimes tenuous, political presence, but it was often overshadowed by the military might of the Adeptus Astartes and other factions. By gaining control of an independent fighting force, the ecclesiarchy effectively ensured that no faction, no matter how powerful, could easily challenge its authority. The Chamber Militant's creation is often seen as a method of increasing the ecclesiarchy's influence within the Imperium, allowing it to solidify its hold over the imperial political system. Fans frequently discuss the potential ramifications of this shift in power, with some speculating that it contributed to the further militarization of the Imperium and the rise of religious extremism as a central feature of imperial governance. The creation of the Chamber Militant is seen as the ecclesiarchy's strategic response to both the external threats faced by the Imperium and the internal political struggles within the High Lords of Terra. Moreover, the Chamber Militant is unique in its adaptability, able to function both in small, covert operations and large-scale battles. This flexibility is often highlighted in fan discussions, with the Chamber being able to respond to threats in ways that other factions might not. The ability of the Chamber Militant to handle a wide range of missions, from subverting heretical movements to engaging in full-scale combat operations against Xenos, gives it a versatility that is unmatched by many other Imperial forces. Fans often delve into the question of how this adaptability impacts the Chamber's effectiveness on the battlefield. Its commitment to both spiritual and military excellence allows it to approach problems from a unique perspective, blending the tactics of a military force with the fervor of a religious crusade. Some fans debate whether this dual purpose enhances the Chamber's effectiveness or creates internal contradictions, as the devotion to faith could potentially clash with the demands of military pragmatism. Finally, the mystery surrounding the true nature of the Chamber Militant often leads to speculation and debate. While the ecclesiarchy's role in creating the Chamber Militant is clear, the exact motivations and long-term goals of the force are less certain. The Chamber's actions are sometimes seen as an extension of the ecclesiarchy's political ambitions, while at other times they appear more like an uncompromising religious crusade to cleanse the galaxy of all impurity. This ambiguity has sparked numerous fan theories about the deeper purpose behind the Chamber Militant's existence. Some speculate that it could eventually become a faction with its own independent goals, free from the control of the ecclesiarchy. Others suggest that its existence is a mere means to an end, serving as a tool to enforce the ecclesiarchy's will across the Imperium and prevent any threat to its power. The ongoing debate about the Chamber's true nature continues to intrigue fans as they seek to understand what the Chamber Militant represents and how its role will evolve in the future of the Imperium. In conclusion, the Chamber Militant's creation is marked by several unique aspects that continue to be discussed and analyzed by fans of the Warhammer 40K universe. From the blending of religious zealotry with military power to the complicated relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus and Adeptus Astartes, the Chamber Militant is a multifaceted entity that sparks intense debate. Its role in shaping the political and military landscape of the Imperium, its flexibility in the field, and its ongoing mystery ensure that it remains one of the most fascinating and often discussed topics within the Warhammer 40K community. The creation of the Chamber Militant was not solely the result of political maneuvering or strategic necessity, but also of the actions and ambitions of remarkable individuals whose leadership and vision played crucial roles in shaping the force. These figures, while not as widely known as those within the Adeptus Astartes or Imperial Guard, possess qualities and motivations that were central to the formation and development of the Chamber Militant. Their actions, decisions, and leadership styles left an indelible mark on this military arm, influencing not only its tactics and structure, but also its place in the broader narrative of the Imperium. One of the most prominent figures in the creation of the Chamber Militant is the Ecclesiarch, who spearheaded its formation. As the head of the Ecclesiarchy, this individual saw the growing need for a dedicated military force to enforce the Emperor's will through more than just spiritual means. This Ecclesiarch was a visionary, understanding that the Imperium's survival in the galaxy would not only depend on the strength of its armies, but also on the faith of its people. This figure combined political acumen with a deep sense of devotion, uniting these two often conflicting ideals to form the Chamber Militant. Their primary strength was the ability to inspire and mobilize the Ecclesiarchy, pushing it toward greater influence, even at the cost of alienating other factions within the Imperium. However, this same zeal could also be seen as a weakness. The Ecclesiarch's unwavering belief in the necessity of the Chamber Militant sometimes blinded them to the dangers of creating a force that could become uncontrollable. The risk of consolidating so much military power under the Ecclesiarchy's direct control was something that many of the Imperium's other factions viewed with suspicion, fearing the potential rise of religious extremism. Another figure whose influence on the Chamber Militant cannot be overstated is the individual who was selected to lead the force itself. This person, often seen as a near-mythical figure within the Ecclesiarchy, was not merely a military commander. They were a symbol of the Emperor's divine will, chosen for their unshakable faith and unquestionable loyalty. The leader of the Chamber Militant was often characterized by a brutal pragmatism, willing to sacrifice anything, whether human lives or imperial ideals, in pursuit of the greater good of the Emperor. This individual was, in many ways, the perfect embodiment of the Chamber's mission: unwavering, relentless, and fanatically devoted to the idea of purging the Imperium of heresy and impurity. Their strength lay in their ability to unify the various factions within the Ecclesiarchy, marshaling the faith of the Imperium's people into an effective fighting force. However, their fanatical commitment to the Emperor's will also made them a figure of immense danger. As much as they were driven by a sense of purpose, they were also prone to seeing any opposition, even from within the Imperium, as a threat that needed to be eradicated. This relentless zeal led to both the Chamber's effectiveness in battle and its reputation for ruthlessness, sometimes blurring the line between righteous fervor and excessive violence. A key aspect of the Chamber Militant's success was the recruitment of individuals from various segments of imperial society, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses to the force. Among these recruits were those who were considered exemplary warriors, handpicked for their abilities in battle, but also those whose faith was unquestionable, making them ideal candidates for this sacred military force. One of the most notable types of individuals within the Chamber Militant was the warrior priest, individuals who combined martial prowess with spiritual authority. These figures were revered for their ability to inspire their fellow soldiers, their ability to lead by example, and their deep devotion to the Emperor. While their strength lay in their ability to unite their troops and provide a spiritual foundation for the Chamber's mission, they also had weaknesses. Their deep devotion sometimes led them to make decisions based not on military strategy, but on faith-driven impulses. This could result in missions that, while driven by a sense of righteousness, were tactically flawed or overly idealistic, ultimately leading to unnecessary casualties or strategic setbacks. While the Chamber Militant was largely shaped by those within the Ecclesiarchy, it also included individuals who had a more pragmatic approach to warfare. These commanders, though deeply religious, often came from the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus, or the Imperial Guard, bringing with them experience in logistics, warfare, and strategy. They were often called upon to temper the zeal of the Chamber's leadership with practical military tactics, ensuring that the force operated efficiently and effectively on the battlefield. Their strength lay in their ability to manage large-scale operations, supply chains, and the integration of new technologies into the force's arsenal. However, their primary weakness was the occasional conflict with the more ideologically driven members of the Chamber. These commanders sometimes found themselves at odds with the religious fervor that defined the Chamber Militant, struggling to reconcile military necessity with religious zeal. This tension often led to friction within the ranks, as military commanders sought to focus on victory at any cost, while the religious leaders of the Chamber prioritized faith and purity above all else. Equally important to the Chamber's development were the individuals who played a key role in the force's logistical and technological operations. Many of the Chamber Militant's most effective leaders came from the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose technological expertise ensured that the Chamber was not just a force driven by faith, but one equipped with the latest and most advanced weaponry. The collaboration between the Ecclesiarchy and the Mechanicus created a unique synergy, combining the power of religion with the precision of technology. However, this partnership was not without its challenges. The Adeptus Mechanicus, known for its dogmatic adherence to its own doctrine, sometimes found itself at odds with the Ecclesiarchy's more flexible interpretations of the Emperor's will. This tension between the faith-driven motivations of the Ecclesiarchy and the technological-driven methods of the Mechanicus created an interesting dynamic within the Chamber Militant. While the Mechanicus provided the technological advancements necessary for the Chamber's success, it also introduced a degree of detachment from the spiritual purity that defined the Ecclesiarchy. The potential for ideological conflict was ever present as the Mechanicus struggled to reconcile its role in the Chamber with its loyalty to the Emperor and the Machine God. In terms of personalities, the most striking figures were those who became martyrs for the Chamber's cause. These individuals, often heroic in their sacrifice, became symbols of the Chamber Militant's ideals. Their unwavering dedication to the Emperor and their willingness to die for the Emperor's glory made them legendary figures within the Ecclesiarchy. These martyrs, whether they were warriors on the battlefield or spiritual leaders in the temple, embodied the Chamber Militant's ethos and became central to the force's identity. Their stories, often exaggerated or mythologized by the Ecclesiarchy, served as rallying points for new recruits, encouraging them to follow in the footsteps of these martyrs. While these figures were undeniably heroic, their deaths often left a legacy of sorrow and unfulfilled potential. Their loss highlighted the dangers of fanaticism and the harsh toll that the Chamber's methods could take on those who followed them. Finally, a notable figure in the early days of the Chamber Militant's formation was the strategist responsible for the Chamber's initial campaigns. This individual was a master tactician, capable of turning the tide in battles that seemed lost. Their ability to blend religious fervor with battlefield pragmatism ensured that the Chamber Militant was not only effective in its crusades, but also able to adapt to a variety of combat situations. However, their success came at a cost. The constant demands of leading a force so deeply embedded in religious ideology often caused them to overlook the personal sacrifices of their soldiers. The pressure to maintain the Chamber's purity while achieving military victories created a disconnect between the Chamber's leaders and the soldiers on the ground. This figure's greatest strength was their ability to inspire loyalty and devotion in their followers, but their weakness lay in their inability to temper the zeal of the Chamber with the strategic realities of warfare. In conclusion, the creation of the Chamber Militant was deeply influenced by a number of exceptional individuals whose personal qualities shaped the force's development and direction. These figures, with their varying strengths and weaknesses, helped create a military force that was as much about ideological purity and faith as it was about military prowess. Their actions, often driven by deep devotion to the Emperor, left a lasting impact on the Chamber Militant and the broader Imperium. The creation of the Chamber Militant has sparked many unresolved questions and theories, some of which challenge the very nature of the Imperium's power structures, religious doctrines, and military practices. These questions, often hotly debated within fan communities, explore the potential motivations behind the Ecclesiarchy's decision to form such a force, its true purpose within the broader context of the Imperium, and its long-term implications for the galaxy at large. The mysterious and, at times, controversial nature of the Chamber Militant leaves room for a variety of interpretations, some of which may challenge the accepted narrative or raise uncomfortable truths about the Imperium's inner workings. One of the most widely discussed and contentious theories concerns the true intentions behind the creation of the Chamber Militant. While it is commonly believed that the ecclesiarchy formed the chamber to protect the Imperium from heresy and to enforce the Emperor's will through military means, some theories suggest that there were other, more covert motivations at play. Was the formation of the chamber truly a defensive measure, or was it a calculated move by the ecclesiarchy to consolidate more power and influence within the Imperium? Some argue that the Chamber Militant may have been created as a means of expanding the ecclesiarchy's reach into the military realm, potentially shifting the balance of power in the Imperium. The presence of such a powerful, autonomous military force under the direct control of the ecclesiarchy would naturally give the Church significant leverage over other factions. This theory posits that the ecclesiarchy's ultimate goal was to not only secure the faith of the Imperium's citizens, but also to place itself in a position where it could challenge the authority of other military and political factions, particularly the Adeptus Astartes and the Imperial Guard. Fans who subscribe to this theory often point to the ecclesiarchy's history of political ambition and its increasing militarization as evidence that its motives may have been more self-serving than outwardly presented. Another unresolved issue is the ideological purity of the Chamber Militant and its potential conflict with other imperial forces. The very existence of the Chamber as a religiously driven military force creates a unique tension within the Imperium. While the Chamber Militant is sworn to serve the Emperor's will, it is also tied directly to the ecclesiarchy's religious interpretation of that will. This raises the question of whether the Chamber's actions are always in line with the broader goals of the Imperium, or whether they are influenced by the ecclesiarchy's own interests. Some fan theories speculate that the creation of the Chamber Militant could lead to an eventual schism between the religious and secular factions within the Imperium. The tension between the ecclesiarchy and the Adeptus Astartes, for example, could be seen as a symptom of this growing rift. The Astartes, who see themselves as the Emperor's true warriors, might eventually come into conflict with the ecclesiarchy's militarized arm, especially as the Chamber Militant continues to expand its influence. If the Chamber Militant were to act more in the interests of the ecclesiarchy rather than the Imperium as a whole, it could lead to internal strife, weakening the Imperium's ability to defend itself against external threats. A related question concerns the role of the Chamber Militant in imperial politics. While the ecclesiarchy's rise to military prominence through the Chamber Militant is often presented as a natural extension of its power, some theories suggest that the Chamber could eventually evolve into a force that operates independently of the ecclesiarchy. If the Chamber Militant continues to grow in strength and autonomy, it might one day see itself as the true defender of the Imperium's ideals, beyond the influence of the ecclesiarchy. The idea of the Chamber Militant breaking away from the ecclesiarchy and becoming a more independent entity is a common subject of speculation in fan circles. If the Chamber were to adopt such an agenda, it could lead to a scenario where it vies for control of the Imperium, possibly even competing with the Adeptus Astartes or the High Lords of Terra for ultimate authority. Some argue that this might be the next logical step for an organization that has already demonstrated a capacity for independent action, particularly when considering the potential for religious zeal to morph into political ambition. The idea that the Chamber Militant could one day outgrow its ecclesiastical roots and become a faction in its own right is an unsettling thought for many who believe in the stability of the Imperium's traditional power structure. Another important unresolved question revolves around the nature of the Chamber Militant's relationship with the Emperor's true intentions. While the ecclesiarchy sees itself as the sole representative of the Emperor's will, some believe that this is an oversimplification of the Emperor's grand design. The Emperor, before his internment upon the Golden Throne, was a being of logic, pragmatism, and a desire for a united humanity. The ecclesiarchy, by contrast, has often been associated with zealotry, fanaticism, and ideological purity. The Chamber Militant, as an extension of this religious fervor, might not always be acting in alignment with the Emperor's original vision for mankind. Fans frequently debate whether the Chamber's religious extremism is a distortion of the Emperor's teachings, and whether it undermines the Emperor's broader goals for humanity. Some theorists suggest that the Emperor might have opposed the rise of such a militarized, faith-driven force, especially one that operates outside the more traditional and pragmatic military structures of the Imperium. This line of thought raises the question of whether the Chamber Militant is truly serving the Emperor's will, or if it is, instead, a byproduct of the ecclesiarchy's desire to reinterpret and reshape that will according to its own needs. The question of the Chamber Militant's relationship with the Mechanicus also remains an area of significant debate. While the Adeptus Mechanicus has provided the Chamber with technological support, there is speculation about the extent to which the Mechanicus is willing to cooperate with a force so deeply rooted in religious zealotry. The Mechanicus, with its devotion to the Omnitia and its belief in the sanctity of machines, may not entirely align with the ecclesiarchy's fervent worship of the Emperor as the singular divine figure. Some theories suggest that the Mechanicus could eventually seek to distance itself from the ecclesiarchy, particularly if it feels that the Chamber Militant's goals begin to conflict with its own. The Mechanicus's involvement with the Chamber Militant may be more pragmatic than ideological, driven by the need to secure its place within the Imperium, rather than a genuine alignment with the ecclesiarchy's religious vision. This potential for tension between the two factions adds another layer of uncertainty to the future of the Chamber Militant and its relationship with the broader Imperium. Finally, one of the most enduring questions about the Chamber Militant's creation is its potential future evolution. As a force that was initially formed to safeguard the faith of the Imperium and enforce the Emperor's will, it remains unclear what role the Chamber will play in the Imperium's distant future. Will it remain a tool of the ecclesiarchy, acting as an unquestionable enforcer of religious and military policy, or could it evolve into a force with its own agenda? Some fans speculate that the Chamber Militant could eventually become a faction that acts independently of the ecclesiarchy, or even break away entirely to form its own faction within the Imperium. Others theorize that the rise of such a force could lead to the destabilization of the Imperium, as the Chamber could seek to challenge the authority of the Imperium's traditional military and political powers. In conclusion, the creation of the Chamber Militant is surrounded by numerous unresolved questions and theories that continue to spark intense debate among Warhammer 40K fans. From the true motivations behind its formation to its potential role in the future of the Imperium, the Chamber Militant represents a complex and multifaceted element within the broader narrative of the Warhammer 40K universe. As the Imperium continues to struggle with external threats and internal divisions, the Chamber Militant's future remains uncertain, and its impact on the galaxy's future remains a topic of great speculation. One of the most significant long-term consequences is the continued consolidation of power within the ecclesiarchy. With the Chamber Militant serving as both a military and ideological enforcer, the ecclesiarchy now has the ability to dictate not only the spiritual, but also the political and military landscape of the Imperium. Over time, this could result in a more centralized and authoritarian structure within the Imperium, with the ecclesiarchy exerting more control over the direction of the Imperium's governance. The question arises whether this could lead to a stronger, more unified Imperium, or whether it would sow the seeds of division and conflict between the ecclesiarchy and other imperial factions, such as the Adeptus Astartes, the Imperial Guard, or the Adeptus Mechanicus. Should the ecclesiarchy continue to expand its military power through the Chamber Militant, it could eventually push other factions into a more adversarial position, undermining the fragile alliances that have kept the Imperium together for so long. The Chamber Militant's rise also has significant implications for the ideological direction of the Imperium. As a force dedicated to the Emperor's will, the Chamber Militant acts as a symbol of the Emperor's divine authority. The more successful the Chamber becomes in its campaigns against heresy and impurity, the more it could influence the religious and cultural identity of the Imperium. This could result in an Imperium even more fanatically devoted to the Emperor, but at the cost of tolerance and diversity of thought. Over time, the Chamber Militant could contribute to the growing religious extremism within the Imperium, creating a society that is less open to change and more rigid in its adherence to dogma. This could lead to an environment where ideological purity is valued above all else, resulting in the oppression of any who do not share the same zealotry. This could be seen as a positive development by those who believe that the Imperium needs greater unity in the face of its many threats. But it would undoubtedly have negative consequences for those who advocate for more freedom, diversity, and a more balanced approach to governance. The long-term effects of the Chamber Militant's creation also extend to the wider galaxy. The Imperium, a vast empire spread across countless worlds, faces threats from all sides. The creation of the Chamber Militant means that the Ecclesiarchy can now deploy a force capable of responding quickly to heretical movements, traitor uprisings, and Xenos invasions, but this capability comes with a potential cost. While the Chamber Militant's existence could result in greater stability and order within the Imperium, it could also lead to an increasingly militarized galaxy where the faith of the Emperor becomes the overriding force. As the Chamber Militant grows in influence, the potential for the Imperium to become a more oppressive, authoritarian regime also increases. Over time, the Chamber Militant may be used not only to enforce the Emperor's will, but also to suppress any form of dissent or opposition, whether from within the Imperium or from alien threats. This could make the Imperium a more formidable force in the galaxy, but it would come at the expense of freedom and the potential for reform. In the broader context of the Warhammer 40K universe, the creation of the Chamber Militant may set a dangerous precedent for other factions to follow. If the Ecclesiarchy's success in creating and consolidating such a powerful military force goes unchallenged, other factions within the Imperium may seek to establish their own autonomous military arms. The Adeptus Astartes, for example, could one day decide to create its own independent military branch, potentially leading to further fragmentation within the Imperium's armed forces. This could create a situation where the Imperium is no longer a cohesive, unified entity, but a collection of factions, each vying for control and influence. The resulting chaos would make the Imperium more vulnerable to both internal and external threats, as rival factions would be too focused on their own interests to work together to defend the Imperium as a whole. On a more philosophical level, the long-term impact of the Chamber Militant's creation raises questions about the nature of power and authority within the Imperium. As the Ecclesiarchy consolidates its power through the Chamber, the concept of the Emperor as a unifying figure is increasingly intertwined with religious dogma. The creation of the Chamber Militant and its association with the Ecclesiarchy's vision of the Emperor's will could lead to the rise of an even more rigid and dogmatic version of the imperial cult. The Imperium's future may be shaped by an increasing reliance on faith and religious devotion, rather than the Emperor's original teachings of unity and strength through human advancement. Over time, this could lead to a society that is less focused on progress and more focused on maintaining the purity of the Emperor's worship. While this might provide the Imperium with a sense of ideological cohesion, it would likely come at the cost of scientific advancement, technological progress, and the ability to adapt to the changing circumstances of the galaxy. The potential for the Chamber Militant to serve as an engine of ideological extremism is another key long-term consequence. As the Force continues to carry out its campaigns to purify the Imperium of heresy and impurity, it may become increasingly zealous in its methods. The risk is that the Chamber Militant could become so consumed by its mission that it begins to target not only true heretics and enemies of the Emperor, but also those who fall outside its increasingly narrow view of what constitutes purity. Over time, this could result in the oppression of entire populations within the Imperium, particularly those who belong to minority faiths or hold differing views about the Emperor. The creation of the Chamber Militant could, in the long run, lead to a society that is less tolerant and more authoritarian, potentially limiting the Imperium's ability to adapt to new challenges and innovations. In conclusion, the long-term consequences of the creation of the Chamber Militant are profound and multifaceted. Whether these changes will be positive or negative depends largely on how the Chamber evolves and interacts with other factions within the Imperium. If the ecclesiarchy continues to consolidate its power and influence through the Chamber, it could create a more unified, but potentially more oppressive Imperium. Alternatively, the growing autonomy and power of the Chamber Militant could lead to internal conflict and division, weakening the Imperium's ability to confront the galaxy's many threats. The future of the Imperium hinges on how the Chamber Militant and its role within the ecclesiarchy evolve over time, with the potential for both great strength and great danger.